So, dear Rector Sebastian Schütze, dear Ambassador Christoph Thun-Hohenstein, dear Deputy Chief of Mission Mario Mesquita, dear speakers, dear virtual participants, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alexander Rieger. I'm the head of the Unit for Intercultural and Interreligious Affairs at the Austrian Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and it's my pleasure to be your host tonight. We are having tonight the second round of the US-Austria Citizen Dialogue on Global Challenges, and today we will be focusing on empowering citizens, media literacy and democracy. And our first speaker will be our gracious host of the university, Rector Sebastian Schütze. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear Deputy Chief of Mission, dear Ambassador, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure for me to hosting this event here at the University of Vienna, this second round of the US-Austria Citizen Dialogue. We are very happy to be part of this cooperation between the US Embassy and the Austrian Ministry of European and International Affairs. And the idea is to bring together experts from Austria and the US to discuss together with you some hot topics that are not just of interest to smaller areas of research here and there, but they are really big topics that have to do with the big challenges our societies are facing in these days. And I'm very happy that today we are addressing something that is of such global importance, the theme media literacy and democracy. And I would like also to welcome our two keynote speakers, Michelle Lipkin and Mark Coeckelbergh. I think we are very happy to have so much expertise on the floor afterwards. Media literacy is, as I've already mentioned, of course, relevant to almost any aspect of our society, but especially for the functioning of our democracies. And media play, I would say, but potentially the most important role in the political arena and decide elections these days. And of course, we are in a very important year. 2024 is election year in the US and in Austria as well. I think it's fair to say that the digital world, the internet and social media were seen by many, at least initially and probably a bit too optimistically, as tools to raise citizen participation, that is, to make democratic systems even more democratic. Some decades into the digital age, I think we now know that citizens need a lot of media literacy to handle and consume media productively, that is, to understand and critically evaluate how media work, because otherwise the promise of more participation and unlimited access to information turns really into quite something which I would say quite into the contrary, and media mutate into an instrument of collective manipulation. And that's probably what we are talking about tonight, and that's the issue when we talk about media literacy and democracy. So a very hot and important topic indeed, and a very pressing topic, not just because of the elections in both of our countries, but because it's a more general problem democracies are facing globally. And so we are very much looking forward to the two keynotes and to the following discussion. And I would like to welcome you again at the University of Vienna. Welcome.
Thank you, Rector Schütze. Our next speaker is Ambassador Christoph Thun-Hohenstein. He is the Director General for International Cultural Affairs at the Federal Ministry for European and International Affairs. Thank you for your opening speech.
Good evening and welcome also from my side. It's very difficult to be happy these days. I'm in a triple state of happiness. Why? Because first of all, Rector Schütze was gracious enough to host us here in this wonderful building, in this wonderful hall, which is my alma mater, and I experienced it twice here to get my doctors, so it was fantastic. Thank you so much, and I hope it's also the beginning of a wonderful friendship between your university and the Austrian Foreign Ministry. Second, because it's the second event in a very important series that was already mentioned that we do with the US Embassy here, and thank you also Mario, Deputy Chief of Mission of the US Embassy, to kind of do this together. These are super, super important topics, as we already heard from your wise remarks, Rector Schütze. And I think to have an embassy, and such an important embassy in the Austrian Foreign Ministry, work together with a university, with the biggest, largest university in the German-speaking world is fantastic. And the third reason is that we have two excellent speakers. I just met Michelle Lipkin, but I knew a lot already about her online, and your personality, of course, is outstanding, so it's fantastic to have you here. And it's also great that you will also appear not only in Vienna, but also in Linz and in Salzburg, which is great because Vienna is a big city for a fairly small country, but there are other cities, as we know, in Austria that also play an important role, and so from that perspective it's wonderful. And Mark Coeckelbergh is somebody who I worked with already, I think 8 years ago when I was Director General at the MAC, and we started, I proposed the term digital humanism, and we started to work on that, and we have met ever since. But some time ago I thought now the moment has come also for the Foreign Ministry to approach Mark, because he's one of the key experts on AI and digital humanism and all these topics, and democracy, of course, but he will tell you more about that very soon. So I'm very happy that you come together and we have this exchange of views here. I would, since I shouldn't speak too long, I will just focus maybe on 3 principles that are very important when you think about empowering citizens, which is part of the title, Empowering Citizens. First is what I would call the incremental trap. We should always be aware, and this is the principle of the incremental trap. What does it mean? We get everyday slices of innovation, technological innovation, especially now when it comes to generative AI, but also other sorts of AI, other digital technologies, robots, and so on. But we never realize what it means in the longer term, and the longer term times are developing really fast, yeah? So what does it mean? How will we be in 5 years? What does it do to us? In a good sense, but also in a bad sense. And the incremental trap means that you're also thinking about the next slice of innovation, but rarely about the big picture. The second principle is the challenge of, the holistic challenge, I would call it, and holistic imperative. Holistic challenge means that we know that we have a super complex world and people come up with solutions for a given problem, but very rarely they think about what does this solution to the rest of the problems we have, to the whole picture. Yeah? And therefore I think we really need to always be aware of what does that particular proposal do to the world at large, to our country at large, to all the things we deal with. Of course, in particular, what I call the dual modernity. On the one hand, the AI or digital modernity, and on the other hand, the eco-social or climate modernity, and related problems. So we always have to think about the holistic picture. And this is a very important part, I think, of our media literacy, actually. Yeah. And the third principle has a lot to do with trust. We need to build trust, but especially we need to build understanding of the problems, because without that understanding of the problems, we won't be able to act. And this leads me to our role in the world. You know, media literacy, and we will hear a lot about that, is not only about us being literate consumers. It's way more. We need to get on a quality quest. That's part also of my third principle. What does it mean? We need to focus on quality. We need to learn to focus on quality. We have all that information noise, but we are not really in a position to develop that sense for quality. And that has nothing to do with your level of education. Even if you don't have a super high level of education, you should develop a sense for quality everywhere, yeah, and in every moment. And when we talk about our role, it's really about being proactive citizens, especially in our democracies, our cherished democracies that have a hard time these days. And we need to develop, let's say, active hope. Active hope is hope. You hope for something to come, and you also do something to make it happen. This is active hope. Yeah? And so we need an active hope. We need to a much more proactive stance, because in the end, and everybody I think should be aware of that, every person on the planet is a co-designer of the future, with whatever that person does, with their networks, their friends, and so on. Sometimes even their profession that allows them to be that. So I perceive my role, and I hope many of you will do the same. I'm kind of also a designer of the future in all my possibilities, and I have to work very hard that our democracies not only stay alive, but kind of enter a phase of future flourishing, which we all need in our democracies. And let's work on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And after Austria, we now have the US with Deputy Chief of Mission Mario Mesquita. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexander. Rector Schütze, thank you so much for having us at the university this evening. It's a real honor to be associated with the University of Vienna. A great pleasure for me to be here representing the embassy. Ambassador Thun-Hohenstein, thank you so much for your amazing partnership on this series and all of the really hard and outstanding work of your team, Alexander, and others at the ministry to make this happen. We really do appreciate it. Today, as noted, we convene for the second US-Austria Citizen Dialogue on Global Challenges, an initiative that aims to harness the collective ingenuity of our civil societies to address pressing challenges that confront both Austria and the United States, and frankly, societies beyond even our own too. But the dialogue's not just about facing these challenges, it's about turning them into opportunities for growth, innovation, and deeper cooperation between our two countries, based on our shared democratic values and our commitment to open dialogue and mutual understanding. That is especially the case when looking at the topic of tonight's event, the pivotal role of media literacy in safeguarding democracy. In an era where information is ubiquitous, the ability to discern trustworthy news sources from mis- and disinformation is not just an educational skill, but a foundational element for both of our democracies. Never is this more crucial than during elections, and as noted, both Austria and the United States have elections this year. We face traditional homegrown challenges of political polarization at the same time that new technologies provide opportunities for falsehoods to spread and foreign entities to seek to leverage our democratic processes for their own purposes. The dangers we face this election year cannot be understated. Strong civil society and informed, engaged voters are pillars to safeguarding democratic values in both of our countries. And media literacy is one important tool to empower our citizens, counter disinformation, and ultimately foster a more informed electorate. We're privileged today to hear from Michelle Lipkin and Professor Mark Coeckelbergh, two distinguished experts who represent the power of civil society in both of our countries. I'm eager to hear their recommendations and hope tonight's event inspires more collaboration between our two countries on this existential issue. So thank you once again to the University, the Ministry of European and International Affairs for your engagement and your insights. Thank you very much.
Well, now we are reaching the citizen part of this dialogue with our first speaker, Ms. Michelle Lipkin. She's the Executive Director of the National Association for Media Literacy Education, and since 2012 she has significantly contributed to its growth and impact across the US and also internationally. So we are very happy to have her here today. She initiated the first ever week on media literacy in the US in 2015, and it has become since then an annual event. In 2020 she was honored with the Global Media and Information Literacy Award by UNESCO that acknowledged her significant contributions to the field of media literacy education. She teaches media literacy at Brooklyn College and is also a recognized voice in media literacy discussions, having been featured on platforms such as CNN, PBS, NPR, and Al Jazeera. Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you all so very much for having me this evening. Thank you to our hosts this evening and my hosts this week. I am very grateful to be here and also just thrilled to be in a room with people that already believe that media literacy is important. So thank you so much for that. As I have been introduced, my name is Michelle Lipkin. I am the Executive Director of the National Association for Media Literacy Education. I'm based in New York City. This event is very close to my heart. I spend every single day of my life thinking deeply about media literacy and democracy. And I know that we are facing an unprecedented time in our world, in an era that's inundated with an overwhelming barrage of information. Media literacy education has never been more critical. The ubiquity of media and technology demands more than just basic literacy skills. And in a world where the news cycle is relentless and clicks drive content and noise pervades our information streams, being a critical thinker and an active participant in democracy hinges on media literacy. So I just want to tell you a few things about what our organization does to give you some context. So we are the largest membership organization for media literacy around the globe. As was mentioned, we host US Media Literacy Week every year. We host national conferences. We have over 9,000 members, 70 organizations under our umbrella. And as you can imagine, our media literacy community is vast and impactful, and it's both in the US and globally. And you can see here just a brief look at our community. We have educators and researchers and librarians, community organizations, educational leaders, advocates. It's really a vast network that represents all the varied ways you can get to media literacy education. So what I want to do is give you a little bit of context, how we define media literacy. So we define media literacy as the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication. So we're really talking about an expanded definition of literacy. We frame the purpose of media literacy education is to help individuals of all ages develop the habits of inquiry, skills of expression, to not only be critical thinkers, but also effective communicators and active citizens in the world. And our vision is vast. It's to see media literacy highly valued and widely practiced as an essential life skill. And we believe that media literacy is a vast umbrella, and you will hear lots of conversation tonight and in other spaces about all the multiple literacies that we need to understand now in this world. We put everything under the media literacy umbrella, and we can look at that through credibility and through representation, bias, agenda, authorship, and ownership. And one of the things we're best known for are our core principles of media literacy education, which was originally published in 2007, updated last year, and it's really a foundational document for media literacy education. I know it's very small, but I want to call your attention to core principle number 10. Media literacy education empowers individuals to be informed, reflective, engaged, and socially responsible participants in a democratic society, and that's why we're here today. So we are often asked, what does a media literate person do that a media illiterate person can't do? Well, media literate people know what questions to ask when analyzing and evaluating media. They understand that media messages impact society, including individual and community ideologies. Media literate people can use tools and processes to ascertain credibility. They understand how their own biases and cognitive processes shape interpretation of messages. Media literate people can thoughtfully and impactfully create media for a purpose, and media literacy allows people to develop mindful and healthy media habits. Now, when the term fake news launched itself into cultural conversation in 2016 in the US, it put a spotlight on media literacy like we had never seen before. And it opened up discussions about its importance and the need for educational efforts far broader and on a bigger scale than we had ever seen before. But what's interesting is it brought the battle against mis and disinformation to the forefront. And while we know fake news has real world consequences, and we know we need to address mis and disinformation, it's problematic when it comes to media literacy because it actually limits the way we think about information and the way we should understand it. So fake news forces us to think about information in the binary, right? Is this true? Is this false? Is this real? Is this fake? Is this fact? Is this fiction? But the truth of the matter is that media messages are complicated, right? They don't just fall into two buckets. They fall into endless buckets. And most of what we consume on a daily basis is not news, right? It's infotainment, and it's advertising, and it's marketing, and it's commentary. And so if we limit our understanding of media messages to a simple binary label, we're missing out on that deeper understanding. And the goal of media literacy is to understand media messages, their power, their purpose, their value, the audience, their agenda. So we need to strive to think deeper, to understand how media and information influence us, our beliefs, our moods, our values, our relationships, how we vote. Because media messages are impacting all of us in a lot of different ways every single day. And today's landscape is completely overwhelming, right? So I'm an incredibly positive person also, and I get to spend my days with people searching for solutions. And I see incredible progress wherever I go. But these are really complicated times. Political polarization in the US is impacting education in every possible way, including what books can be in our classrooms. There's growing concerns of disinformation, polarization, data privacy, artificial intelligence, teen mental health, children's safety, and of course, the strength of democracy around the world in this incredibly important election year. And sometimes, it seems like it might be easier to find a rock and hide underneath it instead of trying to make sense of it all. And this is one of my favorite recent political cartoons, where it says, "My desire to be well informed is currently at odds with my desire to remain sane." Here's another one. One question: if this is the information age, how come nobody knows anything? Because what is amazing is that we have more information available to us than ever before, and yet somehow it seems like we know less than ever before. And it truly is an astounding time to be alive, right? There is amazing innovation and creativity and technological advancements that are changing the world in every way, every single day, for the better. And in the midst of all the chaos, we can't forget that. But we know that there's another side to this, right? And we can put it in a different frame. Because while we want to smile and say, oh, what a time to be alive, it's also, oh, what a time to be alive. We have to remember there is a dumpster fire we are facing, and time is of the essence. And I don't know if you recognize this character. So it's WALL-E from the 2008 Disney Pixar animated movie. And this is a delivery robot roaming through West Hollywood, California today. So the future is here, and we need to be ready. Because truthfully, there really is a wildfire burning, and it's spreading. And when we fight wildfires, we do it from various directions and different approaches. We go from land and from air. We have planes and we have helicopters and smoke jumpers and people on the ground, reinforcements. So I challenge us to think about what's going on in our information ecosystem and our landscape as a wildfire. And it's our job to try every possible way to stop it and keep the forest beautiful. So we know there is no silver bullet for the challenges of digital life. And if we truly want to see media literacy education highly valued and widely practiced as an essential life skill, we need to be working together in absolutely all facets of society. And there has been a loud call for this over the last several years. So organizations are releasing reports on disinformation, on youth mental health, on education, and they all have one thing in common: the support for media literacy education. So just a few examples. So in the States, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine says failure to invest in young people's ability to navigate the complex world of online news and media has consequences for the young people themselves and for society as a whole. Aspen Digital urges investment and innovation in information literacy and media literacy collaborations. The American Psychological Association says that social media use should always be preceded by training in social media literacy. So there are calls for media literacy everywhere. And what we know is that media literacy education works. And the way that we have curated research on efficacy of media literacy, we've identified 5 major areas that represent and correlate with issues that we are seeing in the United States. That first of all, media literacy education helps people discern information. Media literacy interventions work in better understanding reliable information from false and inaccurate information. Interventions can help people make informed health decisions. It can help young people develop healthy mindsets. It helps people make sense of the world, and media literacy education brings learning to life. It makes learning relevant and timely for students today. And media literacy is broad, and media literacy is a broad set of skills, right? So if you look at this slide and just think deeply about any one of these things, whether it's bias or representation or digital footprint or artificial intelligence, if you care about any of these things, you care about media literacy, and this is by no means the exhaustive list. So media literacy is broad, and we need to remember that. As someone said earlier, it affects everything. So in the US, we have a lot of things going on. And if you care about the ban on TikTok that was just passed, if you worry about Apple being a monopoly, if you're thinking about the ethical considerations of AI, if you're worried about election integrity and disinformation, you care about media literacy. If you are thinking about disinformation and censorship, if you're wondering why people are photoshopping and manipulating photos and putting them online, if you're curious about why people were on strike last year in Hollywood, these are all media literacy issues. They all go back to the way we understand media. If you care about representation, if you're thinking about algorithmic bias, if you are thinking about teens and social media and media effects, you're thinking about media literacy. So you might not realize that you care deeply about these issues, but you do, because somewhere along the line you have been involved in conversations and involved with thinking about issues that relate to media literacy. And media literacy education provides skills to thrive in the mediated world. And what we have noticed is that regardless of whether we are talking about the United States or we're talking about globally, there are certain things that we know. There are challenges, right? There is very difficult challenges to scaling media literacy across compulsory education and throughout a student's life. Certain things like it still relies on individuals. There are so many things teachers need to do, and so they're competing curricular demands. There's a struggle with outreach to diverse populations. Right now in the US, if you're receiving media literacy education, odds are you have a library in your school and you have a librarian, or you have funding coming somewhere to support media literacy training. There's also this lack of public understanding that I mentioned before. There's a lot of people that equate media literacy with fact-checking. And while fact-checking is an excellent tool, it is that. It is a tool within a very broad media literacy toolbox. But the good thing is that there are opportunities that, I went too far. There are opportunities, and one of them is this, right? There is a growing global movement. There is recognition of urgency, right? So years ago, I had to spend 30, 40 minutes just convincing people to talk to me about media literacy. And now we're gathering here because people get it. People understand how important this is, and that it is now not about the why, but about the how. How do we make this happen? There's so much collaboration across countries, there's increased policy efforts, there's growing involvement with the tech and media industry, there's tons of resources and materials, and we're finally seeing youth get involved, because youth are now at the age where they're demanding to learn these things and they want to be literate in this world. So I want to end with a point about action. So as I stated before, media literacy is defined as accessing, analyzing, evaluating, creating an act. Until the advent of social media, create and act were not part of the definition, right? Because we did not live in a participatory culture. We were passive consumers of information. And now the word act is so vitally important to media literacy, and I'll take you back to the core principle number 10, that it empowers individuals to be informed, reflective, engaged, and socially responsible participants in democratic society. And it's really important that we remember that part of the purpose is to be active citizens in today's world, which is why you cannot unlink media literacy and democracy. To be fully civically engaged in today's world, you need to be media literate. And I'm going to end with a quote from a report that came out a few years ago from Democracy Ready New York. And they were showing that New York State students deserve the right to have media literacy education. And in their report, they sum it up beautifully, which is today, to be democracy ready, all students must be media literate. And I think we're going to hear more about those connections from our next keynote speaker, and I know we're going to have more time to talk afterwards, but I'll just place this up here for anyone that wants to be in touch and have further conversation. Obviously, I believe this is the most important thing we can be talking about, so I hope this is just the beginning of further conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and I think you made a very good point. Bringing you all the way from New York to Austria is not only to listen to your great ideas and your great presentation, but it's basically also to link our civil society, so to provide new ideas and perhaps even new forms of cooperation between the US and Austria. So on that note, we introduce now our next speaker, Professor Mark Coeckelbergh. Professor at the Philosophy Department at the University of Vienna. He is an expert on ethics of AI and the author of numerous books, including AI Ethics, The Political Philosophy of AI, and Why AI Undermines Democracy and What to Do About It, his most recent book. He is active in policy advice. For example, he was member of the European Commission's high-level expert group on AI and the Austrian Council for Robotics and AI. Currently, he is a member of the Advisory Council of the Austrian UNESCO Commission and the Advisory Committee Ethics of Data and AI of the Belgian federal government. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thanks for your introduction. Let me also say that it's of course an honor to be at this event, and thanks to the organizers and the hosts of this event. I think these topics are so important today, both media literacy and democracy. From my side, I will stress the connection between democracy and digital technologies, in particular AI. So let me start this. I think this. Yeah, okay, of course. So, does this work? Yes. Okay, so what I will do is first talk about democracy and AI, and then at the end of it, I will come back to media literacy, and then we can have more discussion about this. I'm very grateful to Michelle that already so much has been said about media literacy, because I think there's nice connections with some of the things that I will say. I will say more about my book, Why AI Undermines Democracy and What to Do About It, because I think that's the best way to introduce this topic. So the reason why I wrote the book was that I was very worried about tendencies in the world, but also in Europe, towards authoritarianism, or where democracy at least is in danger. And today, this year is really an election year in many, many countries, and is an important moment, I think, to reflect also on the relation with technology. We had the Cambridge Analytica case a few years ago, where there was a manipulation of elections, and we also had already many criticisms of big tech, that there would be too much power on the side of big tech, and therefore too little democracy, too little democratic influence on our technological future. And our technological future is more and more our future at large. The role of technology in society is very important, and the intersections with all the phenomena that we have, such as misinformation, manipulation, and power, are numerous. So I'm an academic, so my research question was, what is the impact of AI on democracy, and how can we make sure that AI supports rather than undermines democracy? And the answer I give in the book is that AI, as it is currently used and developed, does undermine the fundamental principles and knowledge bases on which our democracies are built and does not contribute to the common good. So I will explain this. But the book has also a positive side. It's also, there's also hope in it, namely in some pathways that I outline and that other people also have outlined on how we can use AI also pro-democracy. And I think that's a part that also together with thinking about very practical ways of doing media literacy, for example, that can bring us further in the direction of more rather than less democracy. My starting point was that technologies like AI are not just tools, but are in fact also have, through their non-intended consequences, influence our societies, influence our lives thoroughly. And that means that also in the history already, technologies have always had political influence, whether people wanted it or not, intended or not. And we can see that, for example, in philosophy, Plato had what I call a political cybernetics. He used the metaphor of steering a ship to say that this is something that we also should do with the state. And then he used that metaphor to argue that therefore we need experts to steer the ship of a state. And this is interesting because first of all it introduces a huge theme about democracy, namely what is the role of expertise in democracy. Democracy is, for example, about majority voting, but democracy can also be much more. And I argue in the book, to make it work, there needs to also be expertise. But what is the balance between expertise and legitimacy? And not only the balance, but how exactly should both intersect? And I think that's a big question, like throughout political institutions. A second reason why I find this important in Plato is that we have today also the technocratic claim. The claim of technical people or bureaucratic people using the technology, saying like, leave it to us, leave also the political questions to us, because with technology we can solve everything. This is the so-called techno-solutionism, the idea that for every problem, let's use technology. And what is problematic about that is that then all the social and political problems, which are very complex problems, are not recognized as such. It's a kind of depoliticization of and a de-democratization of politics. In the history, we also see that technologies have always been used to support rulers, to support central power. So technology has been a tool for centralization. And again, we see that both private and public sectors often use this. And so what we need to ask then is, okay, what if AI has maybe this potential, what particular politics of AI is there? And the specific question here is, of course, about democracy. When we go into political theory, democracy theory, it's interesting that there are much richer theories of democracy than only voting. We often think that democracy is just about majority voting and representation, but in fact there are many ideas of how democracy works and should work. And the ideal of democracy that I find interesting is philosophical republicanism, which from ancient times to today talks about self-rule, but self-rule through the active participation of citizens. An idea that, as I will say, fits very well also with media literacy ideas. There's also the idea that you need for democracy some shared understanding. So if you just talk to another, but there is nothing shared between you, then the dialogue doesn't work, right? This is about dialogue. Dialogue presupposes this shared understanding to some extent. It also presupposes knowledge. So democracy, in this view, doesn't work if citizens do not have knowledge and education. Of course, this is an ideal, and one can always question to what extent are states that claim to be democratic really democratic? And in the book, I paraphrase Gandhi. Instead of saying like civilization would be a good idea, I say democracy would be a good idea, right? So it's also good to take critical distance from that and be critical of our own democratic claims. But here it's clear that the kind of democracy that I presuppose in the book, and then the question is, how does AI influence that? Because AI can be used for the manipulation of elections, but what I argue in the book is that more deeply it undermines the fundamental principles upon which our democracies are built. And I of course mentioned the principles of the French Revolution: freedom, equality, and fraternity. Fraternity is a concept that has been only relatively recently in political philosophy be rehabilitated. Before, it was always only about freedom and equality. But there are other principles, rule of law, tolerance, which are needed for democracy to work. And the problem is that if artificial intelligence and other digital technologies, if they undermine human autonomy, the autonomy, for example, to make up your mind politically, if there is gross unfairness, if there are huge power asymmetries in a society, and especially if there is no tolerance because there's not even listening to one another, then this kind of richer ideal, this Republican ideal of democracy doesn't get off the ground. Moreover, if you have a democracy and you have tendencies towards these things, supported by technology and by other political movements, then there is also a danger of authoritarianism, namely of losing this valuable thing called democracy. A second way that AI can impact democracy is through the epistemic basis, meaning through eroding knowledge. I already said knowledge is very important, and we already talked about that in the introductions. And so if it's true that democracy requires a knowledge-based and also a kind of social epistemic side, namely the trust between citizens and trust in what other people say, well, this is a problem then when these are lost through misinformation, for example, but also in interlocking with social change. And here it's good to also take into account the phenomenon of modernity that can lead to social isolation and where bureaucratic thoughtlessness, as Hannah Arendt has pointed out, can also be a soil for totalitarianism. So if AI then enables manipulation, if it creates epistemic bubbles, meaning that you only know the opinion of people who agree with you, if AI also destroys the trust between citizens by creating this misinformation and fake news, and if we can no longer see ourselves at all as autonomous political subjects, even if we should understand it in a relational way, then AI indeed risks to undermine democracy. So that's why in the second part of the book I ask, like, what can we do about this then? How can we make this, turn this in a good direction? Because technology itself is not evil or something. Well, how can we use technology in a democratic way? And very positive, what can AI itself do for democracy? First, I go to political institutions. So these are the classic recipes, strengthening political institutions, and one could also say strengthening the citizens' side. But one criticism I maybe have of some discourse of media literacy is that the focus is very much on the individual. So I think one should also look at how to strengthen political institutions, how to organize participative and deliberative ways of doing democracy. And maybe we need to really think about new institutions. Why? Not necessarily replacing everything, but we need, I think, some kind of stronger institutional link between, on the one hand, experts, and on the other hand, the politically legitimate policymakers. Because what's happening at the moment is that every time there's a new technology, I already do this for 20, 25 years, every time there is a new technology, new advisory councils are created, new rounds of asking experts advice, and this is done in a relatively intransparent way. And what I would like to see from a democratic point of view is that this is done openly, transparent, and institutionalized in such a way that there is a permanent, ongoing dialogue between the experts on the one hand, which can mean also universities, and on the other hand, the policy makers in a democratic context. So that goes back again to this problem of like how to combine legitimacy and expertise, which you both need. So Plato had a point, you need expertise, but it needs to be done in a democratic way. Then the question is, how can AI work for democracy? Well, first of all, I think the development of AI itself can be democratized, in the sense that instead of just leaving it only to the big tech companies, that we somehow insert deliberation and participation, citizen participation in making new technologies. And second, that AI can also literally help the democratic processes in this general participative and deliberative direction. For example, AI can summarize and help people to figure out positions. It can translate, very important also in a global context and also in a context of big cities like Vienna, which are multilingual, right? So if you want democracy in new modern cities that we have everywhere in the world, then translation is also important. So AI can also help there directly, so this is not undermining. Also, what I think is that if we want this knowledge basis, then we can think about particular skill, but I think the best way to do that is to deepen the knowledge bases and to deepen it in such a way that we also go back to specific traditions in ancient philosophy, Renaissance, Enlightenment, and today digital humanism takes this up, where there are certain values and principles that can help us to make sure that democracy does not erode, and where there's also, again, the idea of shared knowledge and experience. So think again about, like, if you want to really talk to one another, if you want to really have a dialogue, there needs to be something shared. This is an argument that I make on base of Hannah Arendt. And if you want to do this in the case of digital technologies, you should also think about how digital media can create this shared basis. And if you create this shared basis, then you have this citizen dialogues, you have this citizen deliberation, you make it possible. So that's why I think that without thinking about education and without thinking about a broader cultural movement also, where of course also cultural institutions can play a role, I think democracy is too thin. And so this is again to try to make the ideal richer and include these deeper conditions. There are also other questions that we should ask. One is that how inclusive are our democracies, both in terms of the humans, but also in terms of the non-humans. If we know today that we fully realize today, I think most of us, that we are not alone on this planet, that there are these other beings living on the planet too, but how to deal with that. Non-human animals, maybe we don't want to make them citizens, but if we don't want to make them citizens, how can we include them politically? This is an interesting topic, but I will not go further into that here. Finally, I argue in the book that while political institutions in a liberal democratic context need to maintain some kind of neutrality when it comes to very specific cultural views, it does not need to, and it cannot maintain neutrality when it is about the bigger normative directions. For example, with climate change, you cannot say like, oh, it depends what you think about it. You can think this, you can think that. You cannot say that. The same with here, the notion of the common good. If you want to do politics, you cannot say like everyone just does what they want and you don't think about a common good. So building a common world here is a normative ideal that I think needs to be included in democracy. So again, not a thin democracy ideal where you just vote majorities, but where this voting is embedded in some idea that we need to do something together. And in order to do that together, we need to share something. And what we share can be understood in a way that refers to traditional norms and values, but one can also understand it more in a way that is more dynamic, that says we have to adapt tradition and also we have to make what we share. And so there is no such thing as a fixed kind of tradition if it is to work for today. So building a common world is something that needs to be done, actually. So again, the idea that democracy is something that needs active work. There's a lot of philosophical discussion about common good. In what I write, I say again what I just said, so that also when it comes to community, that community is not only just something that's given, but it's also, again, something that needs to be made. So this sharing also needs to be a making. So there needs to be a balance between what is there and what needs to be still created. So if you deliberate with each other, like what is the common good, you can go back to some traditional notions of that, but you can also ask like, okay, let's work on it, let's find out in deliberation itself what the common good is. Then what I conclude from that is that citizens should be able to relate to new technologies in a way that contributes to the good life on the personal level, but also in a way that contributes to the common good. So it's again this richer notion of democracy. I also think that if the education is interdisciplinary from the beginning, it can help to be more oriented to solving problems, including common problems. Just as there needs to be permanent links between the experts and the politicians, there need to also be permanent links between science and society. And I think many universities are working hard on that, but it's definitely the direction that is needed for democracy also. Then I come to media literacy, and I think the kind of ideal of democracy that I sketched fits very well with media literacy as this very activating of citizens, empowering of citizens. It also has the institutional element. It's not only about individuals, but it's definitely also about individuals. It's also about creating that epistemic environment. So if you have less misinformation, if you have not these bubbles, you enable this deliberation. At the individual level, that means you need the critical thinking skills, but you also need this orientation towards public good. And I was very happy when I read more about Michel's association, that there is indeed actually a straightforward aim to develop the skills for civic life, so for democracy in a richer sense, for the public good, and also to enable individuals to engage in participation. And I think that means that, that many people working on this theme in academia and civil society, that they actually presuppose some ideal of democracy that is not just about voting. And so if we can try to support this kind of way of doing democracy, I think then we're on a good way of also doing democracy in a way that's resilient against some of the not so good uses of AI, and that makes our democracies ready for that 21st century with all these dangers. So we need those, this kind of change in the knowledge and communicative environment. I will end here. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mark. While we prepare the stage now for the Q&As, I invite all of you to think, hopefully, of many questions that you can ask us. And having the privilege of the moderator, I will just start with the first question, to both of you, basically. So 3 days ago, the MIT... Yes, but we are still waiting for the micros, so... So yes, so 3 days ago, the MIT Technology Review released an article titled "AI Systems Are Getting Better at Tricking Us." And it was based on a study done, among others, on AI called Cicero, which had been trained to play with humans the game diplomacy. And while it had not been programmed to deceive people, on the contrary, it was told to act honorably, it seemed that the system determined that to win against humans, it had to bend truce and break alliances. So, in view of this autonomy of AI systems, what does that mean? And especially, what does that mean if such a system is released on the media? So, let's perhaps move and...
Like this? Yeah? Okay, yeah, thanks for that question. So, of course, AI is more and more used for automation and can gain more independence from humans. But what I don't like about these examples is that it's always assumed that AI is moving into that direction, that there's a kind of technological determinism. And I think that we can create AI and use it in a way where humans do have control, and where we use it to enable the humans to make sure that that they know what they're doing. And so I think this way the problem is set up, I find problematic, but it's definitely a huge tendency to think in that way, and that is because the possibilities of AI itself, of course. It is possible to automate. It would be possible to leave the whole society to AI. But I think that is going in that technocratic direction in the extreme. And we need to be very aware that these possibilities are there and work really against them, I think.
No. He did a great job. I'm not touching that one.
Perfect. Then let's perhaps start with the first question from the public. Anybody? Okay, I see one question over there, and then...
I think you were first. I'm not sure. Ladies first. All right, okay.
So polite.
There you go. Hi, thank you. This is a question for Michelle. You mentioned before that there's also some kind of class or teachings at school for media literacy in the US. And I was wondering if you could share with us some of the content, what is taught and how it's covered, who decides on what is taught at school and what the pupils learn and how often that is changed. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I could spend a long time on that question, so I'm going to try to summarize. I think in general, we're seeing two ways of bringing media literacy skills to students. One is in subject area classrooms. So the idea of integrating media literacy skills into a math classroom, a social studies classroom, a science classroom, a journalism classroom, right? So what remember to think about media literacy as a skill base rather than content, right? So there are certain things we want to teach students about thinking and evaluating media texts, and you can do that throughout the curriculum. So you can do that in a history class if you're studying World War II and you're bringing in newspaper clippings or you're bringing in video files. You can take these moments to have media literacy skill building within that classroom. From a media literacy elective course, which is the one that I've taught at Brooklyn College, my content varies from representation and thinking about gender representation in advertising or race representation in news media. I will talk about content that's based on a true story and how content is fictionalized and thinking about the purpose and the techniques that are used for filmmaking. There's so many different ways to get students to be actively engaged in asking questions, in analyzing, in evaluating, and reflecting on their reaction to media. So, but in general, when you think about scaling media literacy, you really want to scale practice across the curriculum, across subject area, and you want to focus on training teachers to bring in media literacy moments into the curriculum that they are already teaching. Does that answer your question? Yes, it does. Thanks. Starts?
Very well. I think we had a question over there.
Thank you very much, Gerhard Rehmer. Still working a little bit with the Federation of Austrian Industry on European and a little bit on OECD level, national level. Thank you first off, because it was really impressive and your perfect presentations. I'm already convinced that there are good ways to improve the whole situation. If you allow very simple, maybe one very simple question. Whenever I had to deal with education, innovation, technology and those things, implementation is the key. I could agree with almost everything you talked about. And there's one important thing. Whenever we have been talking about literacy. There was financial literacy, economic literacy, there was environmental literacy, maybe now climate literacy, media literacy, maybe we are talking with the OECD on AI literacy. And the question is, how can we bring some of the main points to school, to students, to teachers? And I think this is the key. Everything sounds perfect, but when we are not able to bring the main things to teacher education, to all those things, to media education, I'm not sure if we succeed in a short time. Perhaps you have 2 or 3 ideas for the implementation of your ideas. Thank you.
Is that all right if I take it?
You can start.
So this question is where I spend every day of my life. So the question of, we know what we need to do, how do we actually do it, how do we actually implement it, is the challenge, right? Because what we know across the world is that countries that are doing media literacy education on a very high level scale and systematically are countries that have government support. So the federal government is saying, the Ministry of Education is saying, this is a must. So you can look at the models in Finland, you can look at the Netherlands, and these are countries that from the very top are saying this must be done. It's very rare that that's the case. Most of media literacy education is happening from the bottom up. And some of that is a single teacher, some of that is an entire school district, some of it can be an entire state in the US, but it's still from the bottom up, which is very, very difficult. So the question that you're asking, how do we implement it? How do we scale it, is we need national buy-in in some ways. And of course, that's going to be different country from country. The US is very challenging because our education departments are state by state. And so we're not only thinking about adopting media literacy as a country, we need 50 states to adopt media literacy. That's an incredible challenge that we have not figured out. But we see progress. So we see it one step at a time, one state at a time. Currently, Washington State is doing some really interesting work, funding professional development, nowhere at the scale that it needs to, but we're starting in the states to see models that are replicable. And so it really is, it's slow and steady wins the race. I think that's the most frustrating thing about this space, is that technology and media move quickly and education moves so slowly, and we still can't agree on whether there should be phones in schools, right? So forget AI. Like, we haven't, there's so much we don't know yet, but it's really fighting the fight every single day, looking at models that work, looking at getting it into more schools and more districts, and to do whatever we can to get the highest level of government committed to it in whatever way possible.
Yeah, from my side, I would just like to add that I think that requires also that the teachers need to be trained adequately, right? So, and their higher education needs to play the role to give them some interdisciplinary insights also, so that they're not only humanities people, for example, but also know something about AI or something about coding and so on. And I think that's a better way to do it, right?
To rethink teacher education and teacher training and pre-service, like, it should be a given that these are topics that new teachers are ready to teach from the moment they start. It doesn't address the teachers that are in schools now, but it's certainly a place to start. You're right. We need teachers to have the knowledge of all these technologies.
Please.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, both of you, and everybody involved. When I was vice president of ABC TV in the late 80s and 90s and a little bit beyond that, it was such a simple world. We had, at my start when I worked, 3.5 networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, and we had CNN that almost didn't make it at the time. And we didn't do a very good job of media literacy then, and now it's so much more complicated. So I wish you well. And I have a question for both of you, actually, but coming from different angles. What can be done on an international level to enhance media literacy in countries that are willing and able to promote it? And then about AI, what can be done on the international level, if anything, to regulate it or to think about best practices or whatever? Or is that simply not going to work because there's too many political disconnects and things like that? And are you hopeful or are you worried? Thanks very much.
Thank you. Shall I start? Yeah, so I absolutely believe in global governance of global problems, and I think, of course, I get a lot of feedback always. You're not realistic and so on, but I think people slowly get it, and I think that if AI is really a global problem, if it can have these kind of political influences everywhere, then I think we need some kind of global framework, not necessarily a very detailed one, not the same as in the European Union, where we have the AI Act, which is very comprehensive, but maybe we can agree on some rules, just as we do about nuclear weapons, for example, about energy. We can make some, we can agree on some things, and I think that of course currently the geopolitical situation is not very favorable towards those things, but I think it's a good start, for example, when the UN puts in place this advisory body that works on thinking about global governance of AI at least. And so I think there are also positive signs, and I am hopeful for it.
So I'm so interested in how you ended up in Vienna, so we can talk later. In terms of the global community and advancing media literacy globally, what I can say is that there's amazing collaboration happening across the globe in lots of big ways, lots of small ways, but one group, UNESCO, has a global media and information literacy alliance that is an alliance not only of universities around the world, but also organizations and groups around the world. And so they do some structured work in bringing the global community together. On top of that, my organization, as I said, although we're US based, our membership is, we're a very unique model because really what we are is about building a media literacy community. So international folks who can't find that a media literacy community find us and join our community. And the outreach to, I think what we've established over time is that these issues are global, and so they need global solutions, and we're all in agreement about that. So there are different ways. We have a global media literacy networking meeting every single month, and there's people from all over the world on it. Last year I was in Australia, and I was in New Zealand, and I was in Brazil having these conversations there. I'm here in Austria, and we have a journal for media literacy education, and most of what is published in that journal are from international scholars. So there's a million examples of how we're working together collaboratively, and I think that is so important because we learn so much from each other. Advancing media literacy practice in all of these different locations is obviously localized and individualized, but we can work together on advocating for it, trying to push it forward, and again, that learning from each other of what works and what doesn't work has been incredibly helpful.
That's also a good point, by the way, that we have to try out things. So sometimes we just don't know. And I, in the book, quote Dewey, and for me it's like politics is also experimental to some extent, of course with some limits, with fundamental values and so on, but I think we need to also just try out something, because we frankly don't completely know how it works. I mean, no one knows some things, right?
Well, we don't have longitudinal studies on social media effects because social media's only been around for a couple of decades. So there's a lot of research and a lot of work that still needs to be done. But you're right. It's like we have to keep trying, keep putting it out there. I see a hand back there.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentations. My question would be, what are the standard tools to measure media literacy and the scoring and that kind of operationalized measuring? And what is the data on interventions, and how big are the effects? How expensive are these interventions? Are they government funded? Are they NGOs now in place? Like, we can talk globally maybe. And would you say that we have any chance using these tools to get an improvement? Because on some issues it seems these biases and these social psychology results are very, very look pessimistic that we can change a lot with these programs, or maybe these interventions are very short-lived and then the people leave these groups and go back into old habits, which sometimes have, and is it correlated with higher education, IQ scores or whatever? Is there a positive correlation in these issues? That would be interesting from a data side. Yeah.
So first of all, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't think it worked and was leading in the right direction. So there's definite reason for optimism. It definitely makes a difference. As I said in my presentation, interventions do help us discern, you know, everything from being more resilient against conspiracy theories. That research exists, and we're about to publish a paper on that, and so I'm happy to share like the individual research and who has done it. It is so vast that I can't name it all, and I know that sounds like I'm like, you know, kind of avoiding the question, but I'm happy to share with you. We just did a curation of 100 studies that show the efficacy and how interventions, for example, with body image, when young women have media literacy interventions, when interacting with social media images, that there's a clear before and after of their experience with those images when they've had media literacy interventions. It's just an example. So there's lots of that. And again, I'm happy to give anyone here more information. NAMLE.org is our website, and we're building literally the case for media literacy education, where all of this research is going to go. In terms of the assessment, there's lots of, like I said, there's lots of different ways to get to media literacy, so there's different assessments. Some are very, you know, straightforward, where if the intervention is about understanding reliable information, there's a pre and post test. There is, you know, an assessment of the language, of the knowledge gained. Some is more project-based assessments in the way that students create media and how they're able to put media together purposefully. So there's lots of different ways that we can measure media literacy. But again, there's not the longer longitudinal studies, because this is all very new, so we have to continue to look at best practice and what works most effectively, for sure. And I feel like there was another question in there that I lost, so what did I miss? Do you remember?
No,
I feel like there was another good question in there.
Maybe if you could name some interventions which were very successful, like from the data we have.
Yeah, so I can think about the work of the Digital Inquiry Group out in Stanford. So they used to be the Stanford History Education Group. And so they did a large study with like adolescents prior to 2016. Their timing couldn't have been better. Their results came out in November of 2016. Wasn't planned, but they got a lot of attention for their study that showed that students do not understand how to navigate the internet and information on the internet to seek reliable sources. So they developed a curriculum, the Civic Online Reasoning curriculum, and have continued to test it with students. And there's been valuable progress done in how students, after taking this curriculum, can understand better, you know, what is the difference between sponsored content and news content? What is the difference between commentary and editorial, and, you know, so on and so forth. So the Civic Online Reasoning course is a great example. The other organization that you might know of is IREX. So IREX has a global curriculum called Learn to Discern, and they've done incredible work around the world, most notably in Ukraine, and they do unbelievable assessment of their programs. So it's IREX. So I would go there, and they break down how they assess, how they analyze their programs pre and post.
So the last two questions, we have one question there, and the second question then in the first row.
I'll try to make this quick. My name is Gregory Weeks. I'm a historian by training. And where you were talking about discerning documents, one of the big problems today is the amount of information and the speed of information. And the question is, what can we do to train people to better deal with information that's coming at them at huge speeds? That's for both of you.
Maybe I can begin to think about this. I think that we partly the problem is in the system itself. So we need to make the environment more gentle to humans again, but if that doesn't work immediately, I think we definitely can also use the technology to do that. So we can use AI, and this is in fact what we are already doing, that we use AI and digital technologies in the forms of apps, in the forms of algorithms, in the form of things like ChatGPT, to extract from all this information something that is useful. But the problem is that our tools are not good enough yet. And also another more principal problem is that what I said against techno-solutionism, that technology alone can never be the answer. So we need there to train the skills, but also think of how can we maybe regulate that space in such a way that the quality of the knowledge and information becomes better, and that it becomes actually easier to find what makes sense to us and what is helpful to us.
I think that there's a few things that I would say. That there's a wonderful video on YouTube that is just a video of the evolution of a desk from 1984 to 2014, and how it used to be all these different, you know, we had our pictures up, and we had our calendar, and we had our Rolodex, and we had our phone, and we all, you know, it evolves into everything being on this, right? And so we've demanded that this do everything for us. And now we're stunned that we're on this all the time. You know, it's funny when you think about it. Like, we wanted the tools to do everything conveniently, and now we have them and we can't seem to break the habit. So I would say that we need to be healthy about our media use. It's as simple as that. And we need to know ourselves, and we need to know when enough is enough. I think there is a reason why books are becoming popular again. I think there's a reason why young people are listening to vinyl. Like, there is an urge to get back to that kind of tangible experience. So I think that we instinctively do it, and we just have to. The system is not going to slow down for us, so we have to ourselves try to slow down. But I think if the social media companies and the products themselves can take more responsibility about how they make these tools, so you know, they're built to demand our attention, so they have to take some responsibility for that. But I think that we have to recognize that no one human brain can take in all of this information and all of this noise and be able to process it. And so we need to slow down. I mean, it's as simple as that. And, you know, whatever that looks like to you, whether it's just simply, you know, not sharing as much, or choosing the book rather than reading on a device, whatever that looks like for you, you have to make those decisions. But I think we have to actively kind of resist the pull to technology all the time, so that we can have kind of a balance. And that's really difficult because, again, my phone, you know, everything's right here. I mean, my photos, everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the problem, that the technology itself has this push, and I would compare it like what we just talked about with food. Like, you also, since ancient times, philosophers also think about that. You have to control yourself, learn to control yourself, and eat healthy, for example. But of course, that's is very difficult, and it's more difficult when you're in an environment where everywhere there is fast food, right? And so now we are in a kind of situation with digital technologies where we try to be ascetic, we're more ascetic, and control ourselves, but we are in this environment where actually big companies make profit from trying to get us addicted and trying to keep our attention. So that's really, yeah, that's why I think that there needs to be individual self-control and individual solutions and skills, but also some changes at the level of society and regulation.
I mean, I think we all have to recognize that, I've said this many times already today, that human communication systems have changed completely in 25 years. And the advent of social media, the advent of smartphones, like, it's completely changed. And there hasn't been any concerted effort to educate, to regulate, to teach us what we need to learn to navigate it. So what could go wrong? Like, of course we are in the situation we're in. And so now we have to take a pause and we have to figure out the solutions, because now this is what it is. Like, the genie's out of the bottle and we have work to do. But I just think that we have to cut ourselves some slack, because this is unprecedented, and the amount of information and the speed at which information comes to us every single day is unbelievable and overwhelming. And so, of course, most of the time we feel overwhelmed. So we have to allow ourselves to recognize that these are unprecedented, difficult situations, but there's also enough positive, enough incredible possibility and opportunity here that it's worth the effort we need to go in to figure it all out.
Final question of the night. Ambassador
Okay, thank you very much. When you come in here, you see before coming in, you see a wonderful big poster outside asking the semester question of the university: do we know what AI will know? You know, and this is for me a question, and I'm not asking the two of you because you've given great answers to answer the question what this means in terms of media literacy and AI literacy and so on, but rather ask all of you when going home to reflect a little bit about what this could mean in this context. Yeah, talking about the perfect personal AI media literacy companion that we could have in a couple of years, and so on and so forth. Is this something to be wished for? Or super granular democratic transparency, for instance, by AI, and so on and so forth. So there are lots of questions opening up. I don't ask them to you because we are already late, but thank you very much also for the fantastic answers in this session.
So before we conclude, I would like to invite our three speakers as well to join us on stage so we can make a quick photo. And while you do that, let me thank all the viewers online who have joined us and have been watching us online. Michelle will be tomorrow in Linz and the day after tomorrow in Salzburg. So we're really trying to spread the dialogue, not only to Vienna, but also to other provinces in Austria. And I always say that dialogue doesn't end when the formal part ends, so we are very happy after this to invite you to a glass, to enjoy with us, to ask some more questions to our experts, and to network. Thank you.